Page on the Cathedral of Delphia. Lena led them into the dark rectory towards their unseen futures. Sooka had been told to stay back in the safe house, to wait until Brandon or some other trusted adult came back. 2 adults had been left to watch over her. Brandon introduced them to her and told her to obey them no matter what. Then the flare had gone off in the sky, and Brandon and the rest of his friends, about 25 or 30 in all, left the building, walking towards the cathedral. They looked like they had guns, too. Sooka knew she should listen. She knew that Brandon knew what was best. However, she was worried about Claire. Over the last 2 weeks, Claire had been on her mind all the time. She knew she was here, somewhere in Delphia, but she hadn't been able to make a connection with her. There was something blocking her. She knew, however, in the ways that she knew most of the things in her life, without a real reason, that Claire would be at the cathedral. She would be with Derek Reynolds, and Sooka knew that they were important people. She wanted to be there to help them. The 2 grown-ups left to watch her weren't paying any attention to her. They were sitting across from a table and talking to each other. Sooka could pick up their intentions. She didn't quite understand them, but she knew they wanted to do grown-up stuff with each other. They'd instructed her to sit still and wait for Brandon to come back. I need to use the bathroom. She walked over and told one of the adults. The man, she didn't know his name, rolled his eyes and looked at the lady sitting across from him. "You take her, she's a girl and all. I'd feel weird," he said. "Christ, Benjamin, all you have to do is stand outside of the door. You don't have to wipe her," replied his female companion. "I can go alone. I know it's right in the other room," Sooka replied. "I don't know. Brandon said not to let her out of our sight," the woman instructed her friend. "It's just the bathroom. We'll be right out here," Benjamin said, and the lady friend gave in. "Okay, sweetie, but hurry up and come back quickly, okay?" "Yes, ma'am," she replied, and quickly walked towards the far room with the small chamber pot. Once inside, she shut the door and looked around. There was a window. She turned the chamber pot over, disgusted when a foul liquid poured out all over the floor. Very carefully, she stood on top of it and pushed up on the window. It took some effort, but slowly the window rose until Sooka was confident that she could fit through. Without hesitation, she slid out and ran around the side of the building. She could see Brandon's people, all walking towards the cathedral. She ran a bit, but stayed behind them enough to remain unnoticed. She followed them as they made their way to the cathedral doors. As Lena led Claire and Derek into the main cathedral, Derek was awestruck for just a moment. He never imagined that he'd have to see the inside of this place again. Now that he was here, though, he felt that this was exactly where he needed to be. He would avenge Sergio and Timothy. He would ensure that Delphia no longer stood to hunt its prey. Claire's eyes immediately fell to the altar and to the idol that sat atop it. She knew at once that this was the very idol that Epor had watched the Primes carry away after they destroyed his city in the name of Hyraaq Tobit. Looking at it, remembering back to her notes, she knew right away that it could, and would, be shattered tonight. She only hoped that the other part of this plan would still go properly. It was a long shot, but one she felt confident could work. Well, looks like the gang is all here," the voice of Tabitha Shaw suddenly spoke. Lena looked over and saw her former leader sitting a few rows back. They'd failed to notice her upon entering. "Lena, I see that you brought the sacrifices as instructed. Good girl. I was starting to doubt you there for a minute. Glad to see some people are still reliable around here." Now that Lena was actually faced with the woman, she was feeling the nerves really kick in. Her first thought was just to fire the rifle at her, try to end Tabitha Shaw in one shot. Should she succeed, this could be an easy night. Should she fail and give Tabitha a chance to make a move, she could doom them all. "Derek and Claire," Tabitha began. "So nice of you to join us. I'm sorry I didn't have the time to come down and visit with you sooner. It's just been a real madhouse around here. Now, here's what's going to happen. Me and Lena here are going to have a little private feasting. No big fancy ritual, no fanatics chanting for more. Just us. you're going to die really slow for what you did to Lacey. Unless one of you would like to confess. Then maybe we can move things along a bit nicer. Maybe there can be less screaming between when I start cutting and when you finally stop bleeding. I'm a reasonable person like that." Tabitha stepped from around the pews, and Lena saw that she had several knives tucked at the ready into her belt. She'd seen Tabitha take birds out of the sky with those knives, so she knew that any move that she made against her would have to work the first time. She'd have to get Tabitha to drop her guard for just a second, long enough to raise the rifle and take the shot. "Okay now, Lena, you can go ahead and put your rifle down. It's not that I don't trust you, it's just that I'd feel a lot better if I were the only one with a weapon right now," Tabitha ordered. "It's now or never," Lena thought, and prepared to raise the rifle and take her one shot at Tabitha. As Lena tensed her muscles to raise the gun, another shot suddenly rang out. "You bitch! You fucking bitch! You killed my brother!" A male voice bellowed from behind them. Derek and Claire spun around to see Gregory Leary burst through the small side door they'd entered through. He'd come in shooting and missed on the first shot. Tabitha turned all of her attention to Gregory, who was advancing upon her, ready to shoot again. Lena did not waste a precious moment. As Tabitha turned her attention to Gregory, Lena raised the rifle and fired. She saw blood fly from Tabitha as the leader of the sisters dropped behind the pews. "Did you get her?" Derek shouted, pulling his own gun from behind his back. "I don't know," Lena shouted, moving around to flank Tabitha from the other side. "Where is she? Where is that bitch? I'm going to kill her myself," Gregory continued to scream. "Trevor is dead?" Claire asked, feeling tears form in her eyes. "No time to think about it, Claire. You have to do whatever it is you have to do with that idol," Derek shouted. Claire ran over to the idol and began to examine it, doing her best to remember what she'd read concerning this item. There was a way to destroy it. She and the rest of the think tank knew it. Now it was time to see if she could actually do it when it mattered most. Lena scanned between the pews for Tabitha, but saw no sign of her. She was still alive. Gregory, is it? She's still alive, so if you really want to avenge your brother, look alive and don't let her get the drop on you," Lena called to Gregory. He looked over at her, his eyes still in a haze of rage, but nodded once. Derek looked back and forth. He wanted to make sure Claire was safe, but he also thought just standing here was a waste of time, when suddenly he became very glad he did. Two of the uniformed guards came rushing through the small door, their weapons raised. "Protect the altar!" one of them yelled. Derek, who'd never shot a gun in his life, suddenly had no trouble at all doing so. He aimed at the guards and fired a volley of bullets. One of them went down. The other ducked back into the door for cover. "We've got company," he shouted to Lena. "Make sure Claire is safe. That's all I need you to do," Lena yelled back. She knew if Tabitha was hiding, that meant disaster for her. There was no sneaking up on Tabitha Shaw. Lena's best bet was to get up high and use the sniper rifle to its fullest potential. Above the pews was the choir box. From up there, she could watch over the whole place and even provide cover fire for Claire and Derek. She quickly made her way up the stairs and took position in the box, using the oak railing for cover. Scanning the pews, she still saw no sign of Tabitha. However, she did see that Derek was about to be overrun. 3 guards had made it through the door and were advancing to surround him. Locking her sights on one, she fired, taking him clean in the head. "Uno," she said to herself. Derek shot the other one, causing the lone guard to take cover behind a pew. More footsteps could already be heard coming from the small rectory, though, and Derek was afraid he'd run out of bullets before Delphia ran out of guards. Claire continued to work on the idol. She knew the symbols. The instructions were fairly easy to follow once she and her think tank had figured them out. She just wasn't sure how long it would take. "Where are you, Tabitha?" Lena whispered as she scanned pew after pew. Gregory continued to move about the aisles himself, making no effort to conceal himself or move about tactically. He was lost in bloodlust and wanted only one thing. "Why'd you have to kill him, you fucking whore? Why? He was no threat to anyone. He was my baby brother. You just left his body there. Did you not think I'd know your fucking knife when I saw it?" More guards now were trying to push their way in. Derek fired at them, but they weren't falling back now. They simply used the one in front of them as a human shield. The lone guard that had hidden behind the pew now made his way around, flanking from Derek's blind spot. Lena saw him and picked him off with one shot. "Dos," she whispered. "I'm losing ground here," Derek shouted, and fired at the guards again, this time taking one of them down. This left two, and they ducked behind the nearest pews. There would be more, though. Derek had to lock that door. He fired his gun until it ran empty at the guards hiding behind the pews, and attempted to close the door leading to the rectory. As he neared it, he could see more guards making their way in. It would only be a matter of time before they were completely outnumbered and outgunned. He shut the door, looking for a way to lock it. As he did, though, he saw the two guards move towards him. He backed up, waiting for them to swing their batons, when two more gunshots rang out. One guard was taken in the head, another in the back. He looked up and saw Lena moving to reposition herself in the choir box. "Tres y cuatro," she whispered. Momentarily free from the distractions of the guards, Derek ran up to the altar and grabbed a sturdy-looking wooden chair. It was heavy, and he hoped that it would serve to bar the door for a while. As he advanced to the door, he felt a hot wind pass in front of his face, and suddenly realized that the knife had missed him by less than an inch. Tabitha stood up long enough to try and take out Derek, but quickly ducked back into the pews as one of Lena's rounds tore through the wood right next to her head. Gregory saw Tabitha pop up and quickly ran over, pistol at the ready, only to find she was gone again. "Okay, Lena, you gotta go," the voice of Tabitha rang out, but she saw no sign of her former leader. Derek was able to plant the chair in front of the door, the backrest underneath the doorknob. He backed up, hoping it would hold. Derek could hear pounding on the other side of the door, men trying to get in. He saw the chair buckle with each hit and realized this wouldn't hold for very long. He also knew that Tabitha was still running loose. The pounding grew louder and louder, until it seemed as though it were coming from everywhere. Derek climbed up on the altar and pulled Claire's gun from her waist. He needed it more than her. She had to focus on that idol. He aimed the fresh gun at the door, watching as the chair weakened a bit with each strike. In all of the confusion, no one, not even Lena, who had gained an overwatch of the entire room, saw the little Japanese girl climb in through a small air vent on the floor of the cathedral. Sooka had followed Leary's group. They were planning now to storm the cathedral. She wanted to stay near them, near safety, but the strange knowledge that always seemed to guide her told her to find another way in. It told her that it would take the unwashed a long time to get in, that the door was sealed and very strong. Yet there was a way for a small girl like herself to get in, an old way that very few people knew about. A little air duct around the side that would take her right into the church, where Claire and her friends needed her the most. She stayed in the shadows, avoiding the familiar faces of the unwashed as they prepared to start kicking down the door. She moved around the side of the building and found her way in, just where she knew it would be the whole time. Working her way through the small space, she could see the lights of the cathedral ahead and hear the shouting of people from inside. It was scary, but she knew she had to be in there. Claire continued to do her best to work on the idol despite all of the commotion going on behind her. There were gunshots and shouting. She was vaguely aware that Derek had grabbed the pistol she had tucked in her waistband. That was fine with her, as she'd never even held a gun before in her life, and was afraid that she'd shoot her hand off the first time she tried to use one. So far, her friends had been doing a good job of holding the advancing guards off. She was aware, somewhere deep in her mind, that Derek had just barred the door with a chair. She didn't have any idea how long that might last, but she knew that any additional time was a blessing. She examined the idol closely. It was stone for one thing, a goat's head. She guessed by the age of the idol that as soon as she was able to remove whatever was protecting it, that it might very well turn to dust. Either way, smashing it on the hard floor of the cathedral would also do the trick. The problem was in removing the spell that protected it. Looking closely at the words written in Dawning, she did her best to compare each one with the instructions left behind for her. According to her notes, the idol could safely be dislodged from its stand, thus breaking the barrier, if it were twisted in the right order. She compared this to opening a safe, easy enough. The clues to removing it, though, were written in Dawning, and although she had translated the language, that didn't exactly make her fluent in it now. Luckily, the instruction and the necessary combination were only a few words. It was just a matter of knowing how to use those words in the right way. She'd been working her way through the first line of code, while Derek and Lena held off the guards. The first line was easy. It was the rest that became more cryptic. Okay, first word. Second line is twin. Twin means to face darkness, essentially, so face darkness. What could that mean? She let her mind explore these options. The people of Epor's tribe, while advanced for their time in history, also had a limited understanding of the world around them. To face darkness might mean to face away from the sun. That would make sense. However, facing away from the sun during the day would still be to look into the light, so does this mean facing away from the sun at dawn or dusk? Okay, see it through the eyes of Epor. He was scared and alone, so any work that he did would have to be done during the day. That just makes sense. So, to face away from the darkness would be to face away from the morning sun. Alright, the sun rises in the east, so if I were looking at a compass, a turn away from the light would be to rotate the idol one click. She held her breath as she turned the idol, bracing herself for any trap that might trigger should the wrong combination be applied. When nothing happened, she breathed easier and continued. Next word is Kismi. In Dawning, Kismi sort of translates to star. Okay, next to Kismi is Vod, and that means something like big or grand. Okay, grand star. This is another sun reference. I don't get it. How does that tell me which way to turn the damn thing? Think it through. The voice of Dr. Redbay spoke up in Claire's head. How? This clue makes no sense. She snapped at no one. Picture it through his eyes, Claire. How would someone try to reach the sun back then? I don't know. But she thought she did. The primes had not only become cannibalistic, but also ritualistic. If they were out during the day, praising the sun, they would likely be reaching straight up with 2 hands, one of either side. It's absurd. That's too obscure to be remotely correct. Claire yelled again at nothing. Great scientists have always been called absurd, Claire, but they follow their instincts. Now you follow yours. Redbay scolded, as if he shouldn't have to waste time explaining this to a woman as accomplished as Claire. Fine. 2 arms up, a click to the left and a click to the right. But in what order? Her imaginary Redbay did not answer again. He'd given his advice and moved on, much like the real Redbay would. Fine, okay. Most people are right-handed. It's the natural order of things. Let's just hope that the same rule applied for Epor. Claire squeezed her eyes shut again as she clicked the idol once right and once left. She saw several sparks fly from the base and was amazed to discover that the pole that connected the idol to the base was now wobbling about. She was almost there. Just a few more puzzles to solve and she would have it. She just hoped her friends could buy her the time. Derek was now doing double duty, guarding the door and watching out for Tabitha. She was hiding in the pews and he knew it wouldn't take much time for her to nail him. Gregory continued to pace up and down, screaming for her to show herself. Lena was still perched atop the choir box, scanning the entire cathedral with her rifle. Suddenly pounding began at the door, hard and loud. Derek readied his gun, prepared for more guards. He took a quick glance up at Lena and saw that she was waiting, taking aim. That was when the door crashed forward, but what entered was not guards but rather goat-masked faithful. Like the guards, they did not flinch when Derek pointed his gun at them, nor did they seem to care when he shot at them. They started advancing with breakneck speed. Derek climbed the small row of stairs leading up to the altar, trying to stay near Claire. She still needed more time to figure out the idol. He shot at one of the faithful, striking it in the chest. It grunted and fell to a knee, but did not appear to die. 2 more entered around it. Lena sighted in and took her shots. 5, 6, she whispered as she dropped 2 more. She saw the one that Derek had shot getting back to its feet. She took aim, but was pleasantly surprised when Derek shot at it again, this time putting it down. Now, where are you, Tabitha? Lena whispered. As these words were leaving her mouth, she saw 2 more faithful dart through the doors, moving fast for their size. She sighted in on the one nearest Claire, but never had a chance to fire. As her finger tensed on the trigger, she suddenly felt the presence of someone standing directly behind her. Slowly, Lena turned around her head, praying that it was a friend. It wasn't. Tabitha Shaw had made her way up into the choir box. Her right shoulder was in bad shape. That was where Lena had shot her. Blood coated her face and arm. "Tabitha," Lena whispered. "Boo!" Tabitha shouted and drove her knife forward. Lena never had a chance to spin the long barrel of the sniper rifle around to aim. Tabitha drove the knife into Lena's heart. The rifle fell from Lena's hands as her eyes went from registering shock to registering nothing at all. Derek looked up just in time to see Tabitha roll Lena's corpse over the side of the choir box. It hit the cathedral floor with a sickening thump. Gregory noticed this as well, and upon seeing Tabitha, opened fire on her position with his pistol. Tabitha ducked behind the railing, laughing as she did so. "Gregory, keep her from coming down here. If you see her pop up, shoot her, please!" Derek screamed. He wasn't sure if Gregory Leary couldn't even comprehend simple instruction at this point, as the man's rage had clearly taken over all sensible thought. Derek turned back to guard Claire, but was suddenly lifted off of his feet and driven into a nearby wall. A faithful had caught him. Its strength was inhuman. Derek struggled, but the monster took a hold around his throat. Derek struck the faithful in the arms and chest, but his punches had little effect. He aimed the gun down at its foot, the only place he could hope to shoot it in its current position, and fired. The man behind the mask grunted and loosened its grip. Then the other one was on Derek as well, both of them. He was struck hard into the wall again, this time dropping the pistol. He looked over to see Claire rotating the idol, still not finished. How much longer she'd need, he didn't know. He glanced to Gregory, but he was busy screaming profane threats towards the choir box. Derek tried to call for help, but the faithful were back at his throat again, and he could form no words. From the choir box, Tabitha watched all of this. She'd taken the bullet in her right shoulder, which threw off her knife throws just a bit. However, Gregory was close, and she was attacking from an uphill advantage. She quickly popped her head up again, waiting to see his reaction. He was firing the gun erratically. Judging by the small holes in the wall where the bullets were striking, he was off by at least 5 feet with each shot. Easy enough. She stood and made her move. The knife readied in the left hand, she would now have to trust. She stood up, took aim, and watched as Gregory went to shoot back at her. She could tell just from the way he was holding the gun that he would miss on this one. Taking her time and using the blade as a guide, she took aim for his chest. With a flick of her wrist, she let the knife sail. It whirled in a long arc, almost appearing to be a wild shot that would have no chance of striking him. However, as she predicted, the arc continued, closing itself back as gravity did its job. The knife took Gregory in the lower abdomen. Perfect. Gregory had a moment to register a sharp pain in his stomach and looked down to see the hilt of the knife and the blood forming on his shirt. He attempted to raise the gun one last time. Tabitha wasn't even attempting to hide at this point. However, he couldn't keep his arm up. The gun suddenly felt as though it weighed a ton. Gregory Leary tipped over, landing between the pews. "Now that all of that is taken care of, let's get down to business," Tabitha shouted with glee. The two faithful were pinning Derek to the wall. Others came into the room, preparing to advance on Claire. "Stand down, boys. Claire is mine. This little bitch has been a thorn in my side for far too long. I'll do the honors. You make sure Derek over there stays pinned to that wall. I want him to see this," Tabitha ordered with demonic joy and anticipation. The faithful obeyed and stood down. Claire, so caught up in being close to finishing, didn't even notice Tabitha approaching. Outside of the cathedral, Brandon Leary continued to rally his men. No sooner had they marched on the church than a huge platoon of guards stepped out to meet them. They'd had the advantage through much of the fight, using guns against batons. However, batons didn't jam, batons didn't run out of bullets, and the guards were doing a fairly admirable job of holding them off. They had the numbers, and that was starting to become a problem. "Listen, boys, we must gain entry into that church. Break off into groups. Those of you with ammunition, focus on the guards. The rest of you, attack the damn doors." As Leary shouted this command, a cheer went up through his ranks. "We're coming, I swear it," he shouted towards the walls of the church. Back inside, Tabitha continued her slow pace towards Claire. As she walked, a dozen or so faithful had made their way into the cathedral and taken up position around the altar. They stood waiting for orders. Derek had time to glance at these numbers, to see Tabitha now only a few feet away from the altar, and realize that all hope was lost. "Stop! You won't hurt her!" A small yet strong voice suddenly filled the room. Tabitha turned at the sound of the voice and almost had to fight through laughter at the sight of Sooka Ito standing in the aisle. "Really, Sooka? And what are you prepared to do to stop me? This isn't your little dream world anymore. It's just you and me. So you know what? I'm going to let you and Derek here have the pleasure of witnessing the death of Claire Nobles. And then you and I, little girl, we're going to have a nice long talk, real close up." Sooka Ito didn't flinch at this threat, but rather took another step forward. "No, no, no!" she screamed, and for a moment Tabitha was a little shocked at how such a strong voice could come from such a small child. Who could imagine? Sooka stepped forward again, and Tabitha actually had to blink and rub her eyes. She was sure she was seeing things, but it almost looked like the child's eyes were glowing. It was then that a massive force shook the cathedral, followed by another and yet another. At first Tabitha thought it was an earthquake, but the booms were a pattern, spaced just far enough to be, almost, the footsteps of a giant. That was when she saw it. Derek saw it too, and even in his current state of shock, on the doorstep of death itself, his logical mind couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. From behind the pews, rising as though from out of the ground, rose the largest alligator he'd ever seen. Easily 20 feet long and perhaps 10 feet high, its dimension defying all logic and reason. Then, just to prove that things couldn't get crazier, it spoke. "Lassie lay bon temps rouler," the massive reptile shouted, in what Derek recognized as a rather stereotypical Cajun accent, and to make matters even more insane, if that were possible, riding on the gator's back appeared to be a black cat wearing a dress. "Hey there, Sooka, they tells me y'all could use a little gator muscle." "Al, Maria, please help Claire and Derek," Sooka shouted. "Oh, that be easy. Watch this." Tabitha watched in horror as the giant reptile charged its way through the cathedral, destroying pews as it stomped past. She actually had to duck out of its way to avoid being trampled. "How is this possible? How?" she screamed. Faithful cultists rushed towards the alligator only to be met by crushing bite after crushing bite. After 5 or 6 of them were left in pieces, the rest seemed to back off a bit, not knowing what to do. The cultists that were holding Derek to the wall dropped him and ran over to join the fight. "Get them, Albert," Maria demanded in his ear. "I'm trying to, Maria, but you be distracting me with all that chatter. Now hush up and let me chomp." "Don't just stand there, you cowards! Kill it!" Tabitha shouted, standing up from her hiding spot. "You be quiet back there, you damn hoodoo woman. I thought you learned your lesson, but I guess not." Al followed this scolding by swinging his huge tail towards Tabitha. She leapt out of the way as several rows of pews were crushed. "Come on, boys, I be hungry," he shouted, and ripped into the 2 cultists that had been attacking Derek. Bloody robes were all that were left. The remaining cultists seemed at a loss for actions. They stood back, looking from Al to the small rectory door. "Albert, do not let them escape," Maria ordered, and Al obeyed. Lunging forward, he crushed 3 of them beneath his enormous body. The remaining 2 actually drew daggers and brandished them at the monster before them. "Look, Maria, these ones right here come with their own toothpicks. How nice." In one chomp, the cultists and their daggers were nothing more than memories. "Only one left now, and I've been saving room for ya," Al announced, turning his huge and hungry eyes on Tabitha. Where are the reinforcements? Where is everyone?" she shouted in panic, backing away until she felt her back touch the wall. Tabitha closed her eyes for the second time tonight in anticipation of death. The gator's teeth were inches from her face. However, Sooka had done this. The damn thing was real. She felt its hot breath on her face, felt its drool dripping onto her arms. She braced herself for the end. "Enough!" A familiar voice suddenly bellowed through the church. There was a force that went with that voice, a voice Tabitha recognized at once. She opened her eyes in time to see the gator and cat whisk out of existence like dust in the wind. She looked around, saw that Sooka had collapsed and appeared to be unconscious. The illusions were gone. Standing now, in the center of the cathedral, was the answer to her prayers. Mr. Pinky had returned. My, oh my, oh my. I go on a little trip and this tomfoolery is what I return to? Oh, Mr. Pinky, you made it back just in time, Tabitha shouted, running over to the man. Miss Shaw, you had better start explaining this mess. Tabitha knew that there was no right answer for the situation. If she tells him that Lena was a traitor, he would blame her for having unwashed infiltrate the Sisters of Tobit. If she put the blame on Gregory, she would still take the fall for trusting him. She couldn't think of a good answer, so instead she went with the most urgent matter. We have to stop Claire Nobles. She intends to dislodge the idol. Nonsense. Such an act cannot be done. You are speaking madness. Just look! Tabitha shouted, and Pinkerton finally turned his head, just in time to see Claire and Derek raising the idol from its base. Through all of the insanity, Claire had managed to solve the riddles and break the protection. You there, woman, put that back. You do not know what will happen if its balance is disturbed, Pinkerton shouted at Claire. Well then, let's find out, Claire shouted, and she smashed the stone idol into the hard cathedral floor. The old stone, now without magical influence to keep it safe, shattered into dozens of tiny pieces, some of it grinding down to dust. We did it, Claire. It's over, Derek whispered. Derek didn't know how the fabric of Delphia would react to the idol's destruction, but he pictured something big. However, nothing happened. No earthquakes, no crumbling of buildings, no nothing. Delphia still stood. Claire, what went wrong? Derek asked, panic in his voice. Have a little faith, Derek, she whispered back. Pinkerton had begun to laugh, an evil and shrill sound that made Derek's head hurt. You see, nothing can bring down Delphia, for the will of Tobit is indestructible. You two, however, are not. I'm going to enjoy tearing you apart. Why, I might even have to take my jacket off for this one. Okay, what now, Claire? Faith is really running out, Derek pleaded. Mr. Pinky, would you be so kind as to allow me the honor of dealing with the little brat on the floor over there? Pinkerton smiled. Of course, Miss Shaw. Feel free to be creative. Pinkerton advanced on Derek and Claire. As he came forward, they attempted to make a break for the small door leading to the rectory. Pinkerton simply flicked his wrist and the door slammed shut in front of them. They backed up behind the altar, searching for something, anything to defend themselves. Derek remembered the pistol that he'd dropped. He grabbed Claire's hand and made a run for it, only to find it was gone. Looking for this, Mr. Reynolds? Pinkerton announced, holding the gun in his hand. Tabitha was closing in on Sooka, a knife held in her hand. Goodbye, little Sooka, she whispered. It was at that moment that the main doors of the cathedral came crashing down in one tremendous strike. Standing in the door was Brandon Leary. There, boys, Pinkerton and Tabitha. Just the two we were hoping for. Take them, give no mercy, for they would surely show us none, Brandon shouted, and led a charge into the cathedral. Pinkerton looked over his shoulders to see dozens of armed men charging in. Tabitha was sprinting towards him, looking over her shoulder, face full of fear. Brandon Leary stopped long enough to scoop up Sooka and laid her on a pew. He screamed for two armed men to stay with her until it was over. Claire and Derek backed away from Pinkerton, who now seemed to be the one caught. Get back, all of you, damned heathens! Pinkerton screamed. He thrust his arms forward, and at least 10 of the charging men were thrown backwards, crashing into pews, striking the floor and slamming into walls. Brandon Leary continued his charge, fists balled. Pinkerton raised his arms again, preparing for another attack, but was suddenly struck from behind. Derek, wielding the pole that once supported the idol, struck Pinkerton hard across the back of his bald head, sending the portly little man stumbling forward. Brandon was waiting and delivered a fierce punch, taking Pinkerton across the face and sending him to the floor. Get up, you bastard! I've been waiting a very long time for this brawl, and I don't intend for it to end so easily, Leary shouted at Pinkerton. Delphian guards rushed in through the rectory entrance and met the mob of unwashed. However, it was the guards' turn to be outnumbered. They were only succeeding at slowing the attack down, but lacked the weapons or numbers to stop it. So, Detective Leary, you wish to fight me. Very well, allow me to show you what I can do, Pinkerton shouted, and was on his feet so quickly that it was almost as if he teleported to a standing position. "Observe Tobit's power!" With this, a barrier suddenly formed around the altar, isolating Brandon Leary, Claire and Derek, with Pinkerton and Tabitha. The unwashed who'd broken through the line of guards tried to breach their barrier, but with each attempt were knocked back, left on the ground twitching. Leary reared back to throw another punch, but Pinkerton caught his hand with ease. He began to apply force, and Derek could tell by Brandon's expression that his hand was being broken. The sound of crunching bones followed, confirming his suspicions. Pinkerton, still holding onto Leary's hand, threw the large man across the altar. He landed in a heap near Derek, who stepped up, still brandishing his pole. "This ends now, Mr. Reynolds. I do not know who you think you are, how you have the audacity to stand before me in my own city, but I promise you that your screams will break the walls around you. I will—" Pinkerton's words were suddenly cut off as the entire world around them shook. Every window in the cathedral shattered, and Pinkerton and Tabitha were both knocked to their knees. "What? How did they find the other one?" Pinkerton gasped. Claire answered him. "You mean the other half of the idol? Yeah, it was all there in the Triassic Journal. Epor did a little more research and writing before he buried that book, but you were so aggressive with your little nightmares early on that my think tank and I realized it was best if we kept some things to ourselves, like the other half of the idol, buried outside of the city, locked under Bannister Church, the one that is being ripped from the ground right now." "No, impossible. No one could know of it. You—" Pinkerton was gasping. The barrier around the altar collapsed. "Tabitha, get out there to Bannister. Stop whatever is happening out there. Now!" Pinkerton screamed. Tabitha only nodded and ran out through the rectory door. Derek and Claire were stunned for a moment. Delphia was still standing, which meant that the idol below Bannister had yet to be broken. "We have to help," Claire shouted. "Go!" the voice of Brandon Leary spoke. "Take Sooka and make your way to the Mendez Gate. I'll stay here and deal with Pinkerton." "Thank you for everything," Derek shouted to Brandon as he grabbed Claire's hand and made his way towards the main doors to the church. He knew the way to Mendez Gate. It had been his escape the first time he was here. They reached the last pew and saw Sooka there, still unconscious. Derek grabbed her up and he and Claire made their escape. Brandon Leary moved slowly towards Pinkerton. They were both injured. "Now, lad, let us finish what we started," Leary shouted, and charged towards Pinkerton. As Leary closed in, Pinkerton stood. Brandon prepared to deliver another haymaker, but was suddenly stopped cold. His legs were frozen in place. "Any last words, detective?" "Christ, you fat little shit. Kill me now so I never have to hear you speak again." Pinkerton snapped his fingers. "Granted." As Leary fell to the floor, his heart slowing to a stop, he felt pride in death. They would succeed, he knew that well enough. Pinkerton was just too stupid to realize he'd lost. Pinkerton quickly walked towards the main doors of the cathedral. He had to restore some order, one way or another. The cathedral was now empty. No one was there to witness Gregory Leary slowly rise from behind the pews. Tabitha's knife had struck him in the stomach, that was true, but the bandages that he'd been using to wrap his wound from his fight with Lacey had served to stop the blade from fully entering his abdomen. His mind was still fierce with revenge. He would avenge his brother yet. While he'd been lying there playing dead, he'd listened to everything, and he knew his next move.